All right, guys, welcome to Mark Anthony's Music Picks, episode 62. Today I'm going to talk to you about one of my favorite house producers of all time, Levon Vincent. I realize that this is a very difficult episode to record because there's so much I want to say about Levon Vincent, and I want to make sure that I get everything into this episode that I wanted to convey to you guys. So hopefully I hit all the points that that I thought about earlier today. So Levon Vincent is a New York, Brooklyn-based producer that came on the scene around 2008. Before 2008, he had been producing experimental music and releasing it on a label called More Music, New York. And for the most part, it kind of flew under the radar. And at this point, those records are very valuable because of what Levon Vincent has become. But for the most part, those records didn't really launch his career into anything. They were just an artistic outlet for him. In 2008, though, that's where he started making house music, and he basically came into the house music scene with this raw, unrefined, almost underproduced sound that really caught everybody off guard. So to give you some context, back in 2008, 2009, everybody, for the most part, had switched over to producing on laptops, and the sound was getting very homogenized, and it was just like easy to produce. There was a lot of music coming out. It was getting diluted. The quality was starting to decline. And then here you have Levon Vincent that goes absolutely and totally against the grain in the opposite direction. He's like, I'm going to start my own label. I'm going to do vinyl only. And I'm going to produce with synths and drum machines and sequencers. And I'm just going to keep it old school. And that juxtaposition of him doing everything that was like anti-modern, I think, is really what gave him the launch that his career, ended up becoming. So the first title that he released was this one here. It was called These Games. And I remember this record came out in 2008, and I found it on Downtown 304's website. Downtown 304, if you guys aren't familiar, is a New York record shop that's been selling for years and years. And, quite frankly, I'm surprised the guy's still in business. It's just this little tiny mom and pop record store online where you can still go and buy US based house music for the most part. I mean, he does get some imports, but it's mostly US based. And I remember I saw These Games listed on there for $6.99 or $7.99 back when domestics were $6 or $7. And I was like, who the heck's Levon Vincent? Now, coincidentally, I had been listening to a lot of dub techno from Echo Space. The Coldest Season had dropped in 2007, so I had just kind of caught on to the whole dub techno scene, and I was kind of riding the bandwagon hard. And These Games, this release, These Games, is a house music dub techno fusion. So I listened to the samples of this. Levon Vincent had no back catalog to speak of, and I just kind of glommed onto it, and I bought it right away, and I remember thinking how cool it was. Now, before I start going into like samples and going through some of his records, I also want to talk about a little bit about Levon Vincent as a DJ, because he's not just a producer, he's a DJ as well. When Levon Vincent does a set, from everything that I've seen, he's basically educating you the same way that Danny Tenaglia would. If you ever listen to a Danny Tenaglia set, he's going to drop old music mixed with new. He's going to give you an old sample mixed with something new. He's going to change the subgenres that he's moving through to keep the night having segments and sections and keep it structured. So if you want to go out and dance and learn something and discover some new music and maybe listen to a record that's 20 years old mixed in with a record that just came out this week, Levon Vincent and Danny Tenaglia, they're basically in the same realm of educating you, right? There are a lot of techno parties and a lot of house music parties that you can go to and not learn a damn thing because they're all playing whatever is considered to be the hot track at the moment, and they're kind of using the tracks just as toilet paper, right? They don't really regard the tracks highly, but you can tell when you listen to a Levon Vincent set, if he's playing you a record that's 20 or 30 years old, he's playing it because he thinks it's special to him, right? And it's like, hey, look what I found. Look at this gem that I found, and look how well it mixes in with the set that I'm trying to convey to you, right? So there's just this sense of artistry and passion and compassion for the crowd, where you're getting this very intimate experience from someone that's coming from a place of I love the music, and they're not doing it because of the money or the fame or the girls or anything like that. So that being said, Levon Vincent, if you're watching this, man, your music was really inspirational to me. And what I'm going to do today is take everybody through Levon's back catalog from 2008 to 2013. And I'm going to delineate there because there were so many titles that I couldn't keep going past 2013 and have it all fit into one episode. So I'm also going to talk about some of Levon Vincent's cohorts that he involved in the label, like DJ Q and Joey Anderson. So hang tight and I'll get to those records as well. So circling back to the first record, these games came out 2008, and there's a jus-ed track on here. I'm going to focus on the Levon Vincent tracks. These games came out raw house, stompy bass line. Everybody loved it. It was basically the A1 track on here for a reason. The track that I want to actually show you guys today is probably the least known or the least appreciated, which is Sync Jam. And Sync Jam has like really techie percussion. It's just clicky and catchy, and it kind of gets your ear in all the right ways. And mixed in with that is the dub techno influences that I talked about earlier, where you just got these dub techno elements riding with raw, undercooked house almost, and it just really worked out well. Now moving up to 2009, Levon was releasing a lot of records. If you look at his catalog, 2009, 2010, there was a lot coming out. This here he released on Osgood, and he did a Panorama Bar single with backed with Steffi, and he did Late Night Jam. Now, Late Night Jam, if you're familiar, has that that traditional or that signature, I'll say the signature Levon buildup, where it sounds like he took some sound and had it hitting on every 16th note, and you can just hear it kind of building and building and building and building. And it's very similar to the build in Woman is the Devil, which was the B-side of Invisible Bitch Slap that a lot of people were really going nuts over. And same kind of concept here, where it's amazing to me what Levon did by taking relatively raw sounds and not too much production technique, and still managed to make what are standard house sounds into a beast of a record that like took clubs by storm. I mean, people were playing Late Night Jam a lot in 2009, and for good reason. Also in 2009, Levon released this one on Novel Sound. Oh, and I also forgot to mention, Novel Sound, the word novel is Levon spelled backwards, and I didn't realize that until probably 3 or 4 years into collecting his records. Somebody pointed that out, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. But anyways, here, this is Novel Sound 02, and this is a 4-tracker. I think it was called the Six Figures EP. all four on here are great. I mean, this was another dub techno hybrid where he did the raw sound and the dub techno elements kind of like reverbing in the background. And the track on here that I liked was Early Reflections. I mean, you could pick any of the four tracks on here and talk about them, but Early Reflections, really nice dub techno influence, and this is, you know, Levon at like coming into his peak, in my opinion, right here. In 2009, Levon also kicked off a label called Deconstruct, which was just a sub-label where he was going to involve other producers on his projects. So he hooked up with Joey Anderson, Anthony Parasol, Jus-ed. I think that's it. Anyways, this was Deconstruct number 2, and this was Party People Clap. Now, DJ Q did the original. DJ Q is another New York producer that's known for like super raw, super abstract house, almost like wonky with tons of bass and very much like dominating the low end of the frequency spectrum with DJ Q tracks normally. And the original mix, I like the original mix a lot. It's got some weird syncopated percussion, and it's just kind of like odd, but in a cool way. It's got a mixture of hard elements and minimal aesthetic at the same time. And Levon just kind of came in and put his LV touch on it, and you know, dropped like some extra wonky elements on top of it, and I think made the kick even more dominant and prominent and hard and kind of in your face. And this was a speaker tester. When this came out, I just remember thinking, like, I've never heard a track like this before. And that goes for both the original mix and Levon's mix. They were both just, like, out of left field, and they pulled it off so well. So this one, I feel like, is essential. And now up to 2012, sticking with Deconstruct, you can see this is, if I get this close to the camera, the lettering on here, this was Deconstruct stamped on here. The lettering's starting to wear off. That's how kind of like raw this was. I guess whatever they took to, you know, rubber stamp each copy, you know, it's starting to wear off after all these years. This is Joey Anderson's Earth Calls EP, it was called. The track that I really like on here is called Hydrine. Now, if you guys are familiar with Joey Anderson at all, he's similar to Levon in that he's into retro gear. He's got a lot of synths and old synths, and he's into old sounds. So Joey Anderson productions are usually old synth, new production, if that makes any sense. Like modern production techniques using old sound elements. And if you listen to the track Hydrine, it's very minimal in its aesthetic. I mean, it's a kick. There's, you know, something on the offbeat, and then he's just doing a little bit of synth work. And the one element that he chose, it sort of sounds like something Jeff Mills would put in one of his space-themed techno tracks. Like it's just kind of got that I'm out in space, I'm flying to the moon type element going on. And it's really nice. It really fits in with the rest of Levon's catalog, and to me, it sounds like a Levon Vincent release. Like, I commented on this on Discogs years and years ago, that it actually does sound like a Levon Vincent release. So I wonder if Joey Anderson, when he was making it, almost took Levon's back catalog into consideration when trying to like assemble this EP. But this is really high quality, and I think this has aged well and will continue to age well. Also, in 2012, one of Levon's most famous EPs was this one here, this Impression of a Rainstorm. Now, if you go and read the comments on this, I mean, everybody's talking about every track. There's different people talking about each track and saying how great they are, and I agree. This is a great 3-tracker. Impression of a Rainstorm, really nice A-side, 8 or 9 minutes long, and it really showcases a lot of Levon's dynamics and talent. Rev's Cost is another like dirty house number, and by the way, the name Rev's Cost, the Revs and Costs were two graffiti artists that were prominent in New York, and I'll show you a picture of that. But they would basically put their tags all over the city, and they were kind of known. I don't know the time period that it was. I want to say it was maybe in the 90s or the 2000s. Don't hold me to that, but they were prominent graffiti artists, and I think Levon was just giving them a nod with the track name. And Pivotal Moments in Life is the one that I picked to give you a sample for here because it shows Levon's softer side. Levon has a background as a pianist, so you can tell that a lot of his tracks really focus around, you know, his key work or his piano work. And here he just took like an ambient, soft, you know, getting out of the club kind of take here, and it just turned out great. It's one of his softer tracks, and it's one that will really draw some emotion out of you if you let it. And closing out the episode, in 2013, Levon came back and released this one on Novel Sound, and it's Novel Sound 08. Now, it's got another version of Rainstorm on here, which a lot of people like. It's got another version of Double Jointed Sex Freak, and the reason I haven't mentioned Double Jointed Sex Freak on this episode is because I already talked about it on episode 6. And episode 6, I try not to repeat and review the same tracks twice, but DJ SF is my favorite Levon Vincent track of all time. So before you guys jump down my throat for not including it in this episode, I already talked about it in episode 6. The version that's on here is actually really nice too. It's basically just a rework and a re-edit, retweak of the original elements, but really quality. The track that I want to feature on here though and give you a sample for is the question mark track. I'm going to call it that. It's just 3 question marks. It's got a really, really cool drop in the beginning of it, and I always wanted to start one of my sets with this. I just never got the chance, but if you just listen to the simplicity and the beauty and intensity simultaneously that just this drop creates, it's just awesome. And I always, like I said, I always just wanted to drop this right in the beginning of a set, kick everything off into gear, and just have something really nice queued up to follow this. That's all I have for today. I hope I covered all my Levon Vincent points. I mean, he's really an interesting artist. He's got so much catalog. And if I get enough time, I'm going to come back and do a 2013 to current episode of this so I can feature some of his newer releases, including some of the tracks that came out on his album and some of the really nice singles that have released over the last 5 years. Levon, thank you so much for all the music, and enjoy your guys' weekend. Take care. Peace.